Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. And if it's your first time here, then welcome also. You're very welcome to join us on what essentially I guess is a little bit of a sort of kind of forum, uh, where hopefully as the videos go by everyone will feel a little bit more confident in sharing their work. But yeah, welcome everybody. Now you're gonna have to forgive me today because I've got a rotten sore throat, I've got a rotten cold, and it's about 33 degrees outside, so it's not easy because I've got a bit of a temperature anyway, and I'm very hot. Anyway, we'll crack on. So last week's episode covered the sort of idea, the welcome into the channel, the sort of things that we're going to be doing, and on all of that sort of good stuff. And I did say at a point in last week's episode that this week we would talk about one of the main characters and how I came up with the character, and what sort of shapes how I go about finding and creating characters for the story. Now, as I said before, the story was something that I kind of had in my mind. Um, it was, it sort of comes to me as it always does, in fragments and little bits and pieces, and I can't remember specifically whether this one was through something, a conversation I've heard, or whether it's just an idea that sort of I was, normally my ideas for my stories come from me doing something else. So sometimes it could be a dream and I wake up and I think, well, I've got to write that down. Sometimes it could be, I'm playing Farming Simulator or something, and then I think, oh, hang on, that's a pretty good idea, or whatever. So that's, sort of tends to be where roughly, usually my ideas come from. So as I say, but every character um, that I need for my book is made up, or based very loosely on people that I know, and it won't be it won't be the character is entirely that person. It will be that the character maybe has their kindness trait or their anger trait or whatever, and then I can work it in. But in order for my characters to come alive, usually I do sort of take myself out for a day or two and just sort of go places that are going to have lots of people. Now, funnily enough, the best place to go to watch characters is a supermarket. And this is where Mara came from. I had an extraordinary piece of luck with these two characters that played out right in front of me. Excuse me. That played out right in front of me, and I was able to come up with, as I say, through what I saw and what I witnessed, I was able to come up with two characters. Now, James and the character, we're not going to go through his build up and his makeup and sort of how I come from him, because I can speak for James because it's largely my character. So this story sort of started to come from a relationship that I was in about a year, 2 years ago, something like that, with this woman, and the control and manipulation that she used, sort of not really only me, really, other people around her, and I started to kind of form um, this character, and as I say, little bits of her, the relationship I was from, and then the rest of it is what I saw that day in the supermarket. So without further ado, we'll get into it. Now, what I'm going to do is, and obviously the reason why it's large print like this is this is not how normally I would write. Normally it's Times New Roman, and size 12. But in order for you to be able to see it on screen, I've had to blow it up a little bit. because I have pre-recorded this and you couldn't see what was on screen, but now you can. So, as I say, so the story and the idea you'll know from last week is the voice only I hear. And today we're looking at Mara. Now, Mara is, as I say, one of the main characters. She's the main female character. Um, she's the main living female character. There is another sort of kind of main female character that runs alongside of Mara and James and Dan in the story, but she's not living. She's just a voice in James's head. And like I say, I can speak for James because this is again sort of loosely based on me and some of the experiences that I've had in life that I felt would make a good story. And and I felt that, and the good thing about James is that I can say what I like. It doesn't matter. I can't offend myself, so, and I can't upset myself either, so I can say what I want. So every character I write starts with something I saw, which in this case is true. Something that didn't make sense until it made too much sense. Um, that doesn't necessarily apply to this situation and this character, but it has applied in the past. And essentially all that means is that you see something happen and you think, what? And then you go home and and maybe a day or 2 days later, you're sort of still thinking about it, and then eventually it starts to make sense, and then it makes too much sense because you've figured out fully what's going on. But as I say, in this situation, that kind of happened because it took me a little while to realise the the sort of the connection between the two people in the supermarket. So it sort of didn't make sense, but then one word or one sentence rather changed everything, and then I began to fully understand what was going on. And Mara is one of them. This is how she arrived. So, as I say, this is how I've come up with the character Mara. I'll just scroll the screen up so we can keep it all new in. Now, feel free to mute me and just go down and read it yourself. But as I say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and fill in the bits. I'm going to try and sort of explain how I got where I got to, and what I did and everything like that. But as I say, feel free to mute and to do your own thing. Now, in the story, Mara and James are in a loveless relationship. Inwardly, she still holds all her flames for Dan, her ex. Now, again, this is sort of loosely based on real life and the situation that I was in. Outwardly, venom spews from her mouth like poisonous mist from a deadly snake, performative, bitter, and rehearsed. And that was kind of what I. Excuse me for 1 second. I've just got to take a drink. That was kind of what I lived with for about 2.5 years. She would, on the one hand, she would act, behave, and say one thing, but it was very obvious that she was feeling the complete opposite. At first, I didn't really know any of this, which is true. I had the story sketch roughly in my head, which is what I've said, already. Shapes without shadows. Now I needed the characters to perform the idea. But instead of giving them the words, the meaning, or the tone, I let them show me. Now, this is a very important thing. Two very important things here I'm going to say for anyone that enjoys writing and that sort of wants to try and take their writing up an extra level. And this is a very important lesson that I learned, and I learned this sort of quite luckily in sort of I think it was my mid-20s, mid to late 20s. The first thing I'm going to say is, because it's quite a short thing, is don't name your character and then try and find the character. And the reason why I say that is if you name a character Jilly and then she turns into a bit of a bitch, or a bit of a sort of tearaway, the name isn't going to fit, but you've grown attached to that name and you don't want to change it. And then, so names to characters are very important, and they're very important for lots of reasons. The main reason is, and I'll sort of kind of come on to explain this at the end. The reason why in the end Mara was chosen. So Mara didn't start out as Mara. Mara has had quite a few names, and eventually we settled up, or I settled upon Mara for a good reason. Now the other thing there is, now I needed the characters to perform the idea, and this is very important as well. If you're one of these writers like I was back in my 20s that said he said, she said a lot, and I couldn't get away from that, what this is what happened to me, and see if see if you can apply. And like I've said before, I'm not here to teach. This is not a how-to video. I'm not a paid writer. I'm not professional. I'm not qualified in any way, shape, or form. I'm just someone that's been writing since the age I was 10, because I couldn't deal with and cope with the grief of losing my granddad, who I absolutely adored beyond everything. That man was everything that I would have wanted to have been when I grew up. And so, I've been writing since then. So this is not a how-to. I'm not telling you how to do it. I'm just saying this is how I do it. This is why I do it this way. And maybe, one of you or two of you may get something from that and think, oh, right, yeah, okay, I hadn't thought of that. So like I said, I needed the characters to perform the idea, but instead of giving them the words, and this is very important. So, as I said, I used to write he said, she said a lot, and what that does is it spoils the flow of the story, and not only that as well, but to my cost. The only time that I've sent a piece of work off to try and be published, and it came back with it's a good story, but it gets sort of drowned. I can't remember the wording exactly now because like it's 20 some odd years ago, but it's basically the he said, she said thing, and it spoiled it, and it was a bit amateurish, and also as well a little bit childish as well, and then that was kind of what came back from the publisher, and that sort of destroyed my confidence, and I've never ever submitted anything ever since, and it's wrong, and that's why we're going to do this. We're going to do this on YouTube, and then we're going to submit it, and we're going to see what happens. So I entered a writing competition in my 20s, and the competition was to write this story. They gave you the title, and you had to write a story to fit the title. And the title they gave you was Murder in Mind, and you had to write a story to fit that. No problem. So I thought, well, I'll enter it. I'm not going to win it, but I'll enter it. It'll be a fun exercise, because practice is very important as a writer. I sometimes kind of sort of liken writing to footballers. Footballers are not as good as what they do on a Saturday just because they're just so talented. They have to train, for 4 or 5 days in the week, to be really good for 90 minutes on a Saturday. It's all the work you don't see, where and this, writing, as I say, is no different. You need to practice, and I just thought it would be a really good practice exercise, and so I sort of went home and did this book, did this idea, wrote this, and you had to sort of write. You could either write it in story form or in script form, and I wrote it in both and sent both off to the competition. And I didn't expect to hear anything. Of course, didn't. I'd entered writing competitions before and I'd never heard anything, and this was no different. And a few months later, I got a letter back saying that my entrance had made the top 3 and was now being judged, and I would know in a short while, sort of whether I'd been top 5, sorry, and then it'd be going to the top 3, and then the top 3 winners, winner would get the script or the story performed by the local Amdram group. It was the Amdram group that had put the competition up. Basically, they'd got nothing that they could perform, and they thought, "Oh, I know what we'll do. We'll see if there's anyone out there that's quite good at writing that could write as a play." And Anyway, it got a letter again saying, "Congratulations, you've won. You know, we're going to perform your play next summer, and you know, would you like to come along and help to put it together?" And I wrote back, and at the time I was suffering from quite bad mental illness where I couldn't go out, I couldn't leave the house, I couldn't, you know, sort of do anything. And so I wrote back and said, "No, I've done my bit. You know, it's up to you now. You know, I've given my piece of work to you. You do as you please with it." And you know, sort of hiding the fact I can't come to you, see you do it and help and shape it and form it because I'd love to, but mentally my mind just won't let me do it. You know, I just wanted to sit in my room all day and write. I didn't want to go out. I didn't want to see the outside world. I hated the outside world. You know, and that was sort of kind of what I did. But I then got 2 tickets to the first performance, and they wanted me to go because they wanted to introduce me and they wanted to sort of say this was my work. And I built up and I built up and I built up, and thanks to my good friend Mandy, who went with me, we managed to go that night. I managed to stay there that night, which was a miracle at the time in itself. And it was that night when I learned that I needed the characters to perform the idea. So I, as a writer, I was doing everything for them. You know, I was writing all their lines, their directions, and this, that, and everything else. And it was like I had just statues that were moving around a page, and you know, that's no good. You know, you can't have statues, you know, sort of moving around a page. And the other good sort of point that I got from it was that what you need to remember as a writer is you're not telling their story, they're telling yours. Once you get your head round that, once you start to see real people bring your words to life, you begin to understand, as I say, you're not telling their story, they're telling your story. And once you get your head round that, you stop writing he said, she said. It's honestly like I literally, like, you know, from the next time I started writing, I didn't write it anymore because I didn't need to, because they were telling my story. I didn't need to say, oh, and then this character went in here and he said, and you know, she said to this character, and then he said back. You know, suddenly it was a case of, you know, this character goes in here, and then you fill in a scene. And the dialogue just sort of comes in the sort of painting of that picture. So it's a very important sort of lesson to learn, that get them to perform your idea. Don't, you know, sort of pick them up and place them everywhere. Let them be fluid, you know, let them, you know, be like liquid, and just let them fill in and move and change shape and what have you. You know, keep the core of your idea, keep the core of what it is that you're trying to do, but you know, give them freedom. Let them, you know, as I say, let them tell your story. You know, so that was, as I say, that night when I watched my words coming to life on stage, which was incredible, by the way. And I'm sort of sitting there, and I remember Mandy turning to me and say, "You did this," and I was like, "Yeah, I know. You know, it's odd. You know, no one ever reads my work, let alone now I've got a group of people bloody acting it out, you know." So it was a really surreal thing to see. But as I say, it really helped my writing because it helped me to realize, you know, I need them to tell my story, not me to tell their story. It's not their story that I'm trying to write, it's my story, you know. And all my characters are doing is just acting it out. You know, and like, you know, sort of kind of real life people, your characters are going to make mistakes. Your characters are not going to be word perfect. They're not going to be action perfect all of the time. And what's important is keep the mistakes in. It makes them real. It makes them human, you know. So as I say, that's you know, something for me that's quite important. Like I said in last week's video, I drop them into something they maybe don't want to be in, and I watch and I see how they react, how they shift from what I saw in my mind's eye to what they actually are under pressure. This situation did, so it wasn't necessarily, so it was a real situation, it was a real thing that happened. And then once I'd realised that I'd got my characters, then you put them in another situation. But the thing that we're talking about today was a real thing. It happened. It, you know, was witnessed by probably several hundred people in the supermarket. Yeah, but as I say, like I said last week, and just said now, obviously, once you've got them sort of kind of set, start putting them in situations and just see whether they pass your auditions. Because sometimes, and I've had characters that I thought, oh, that's a brilliant character, and then I've started to put him in situations, or her, that are maybe going to crop up in the book, and you suddenly think, well, that's not believable. They're just not grabbing my attention, so um, it's again quite important that you do that. So I dropped Mara into a supermarket, which I didn't because that's where she came from, but I've written it like that for the purpose of this, because it's just easier to kind of um, just easier to explain. I put her beside James, and then I brought in her ex Dan and his new girlfriend. I wanted to see how Mara would respond, especially in public, especially when everyone's playing at being fine. And that's another sort of that's a detail, that is. So in terms of what I mean there is that you've got what goes on behind closed doors, and everyone is kind of like that. I think it's with social media and the fact that now we can't object to anything because it offends too many people. I think we're now starting to lose the what goes on behind closed doors. I think we're now starting to see, because the problem is behind closed doors people are now putting them true selves on social media, Facebook, and all of that, and you're seeing what these people are actually like in real life, you know, or what they're like behind closed doors in real life, and now people have got to the point where there's no discipline in this world. There's no right and wrong, and so therefore there is no longer sort of two sides to every person. They're just that person. Be it good, bad or ugly, they're just that person. For me, myself, I'm not on social media. I don't sort of do all of that. I try to keep myself as much as I can to myself. I know I'm doing a YouTube video channel, but I just thought that people may get something from this. But when I'm out, I like to be polite. I like to be courteous. I like to be thoughtful, considerate to other people. When I'm at home, I can relax a little bit more. I probably wouldn't swear out in public, but behind closed doors, yeah, the odd F word here and there probably does escape my mouth, but out outside, I would hope that I would conduct myself in the right way, and I feel that's important. As a kid, I had manners and respect, sort of drummed into me. Speak when spoken to, and all of that. I can remember many, many times me and my brothers going to mum and dad's friends and family and what have you, and we would sit at their feet like little obedient doggies, you know. And literally we would only speak and we would only make a noise when we were spoken to, and that was how I was brought up, and I still maintain that today. And as I say, I've lived with a couple of people that have had their own children, and I look at those children and I just think, what has this world become? But it's because we've taken respect away, we've taken discipline away, we've taken just plain old fashioned manners away. The tension between Mara and Dan is pivotal to the story. They share a secret, something buried so deep that if ever surfaced, it would ruin both their lives. So I watched what they did when it was almost exposed. Now, as I say, I had Mara and Dan in my mind. They had completely different names at this point, because although I'd thought the tension and the hatred between them, I hadn't seen the tension and the hatred between them. And like I say, we're gonna at the end, I'll tell you why I then gave them their names, and it is quite important. So, as I say, in the story, they do share a secret. We're not going to tell you what it is now. You're going to have to keep watching. It will slowly begin to unravel. And Mara and Dan and James are all involved. Only James doesn't know he's involved yet. You know, Mara and Dan, they know what's gone on in the past. They still have, because of what's gone in the past, they still have this bond, and they've kind of broken up. But they know they shouldn't be apart because maybe it's they don't quite trust each other to keep their secret. So they're kind of sort of now thinking, we really should be together, but we can't be together because then people are going to, talk or whatever, and we don't need that. So yeah, as I say, there's a, a, a secret deeply buried between them, and as I say, in the story, it starts to be exposed. Um, and they suddenly they need to sort of kind of work together again. I guess is the best way to put it. As the author, I speak for James. As I said before, he's part of me. But the others, they're just names until they interact with life, until I give them a moment and watch what they do when nobody's handing them a script. Now, I say they're just names. Like I said, I had these two characters named you know, before Mara and Dan. And this is why I said earlier, don't give your characters names before you start, because inevitably, as I say, there's a reason why don't give them the names. So it's a little, for me, it's a bit like The Langoliers by Stephen King. Now, if anyone's ever read the novella or the collection of short stories that's involved in, which is Four Past Midnight, and seen the film, it is an absolutely fantastic book story to read, but it's a brilliant film. And it is available on YouTube, funnily enough. So if you go onto YouTube and you type in The Langoliers full movie by Stephen King, it is on YouTube for you to watch if you want to. Be warned, it is nearly 3 hours long, but it is an absolutely brilliant film. So if you're interested, as I say, go check it out. There's that moment when the characters, for those of you who know what I'm talking about, there's that moment in the characters arrive back at the airport just before the world catches up with them. For a few seconds, everything is silent, time hasn't restarted, and everything is still, and then suddenly it all snaps into place. Noise, people, life. That's what I'm doing to my characters. I'm jolting them back, into existence for the first time. And as I say, for that to kind of make sense, you're going to have to go and watch the film or at least read the book. As I say, for that to make sense. It was a Saturday like any other. The mundane weekly shop, fluorescent lighting, plastic baskets, queues full of tired faces, nothing profound really. I was unloading groceries onto the conveyor belt. Subconsciously, I felt the shift before I even looked. Now, what I mean by that is, I'm unloading my groceries. That sort of, we're side by side with another man and a woman, and I'm unloading the groceries. I'm with someone else at the time, and as I say, I'm unloading the groceries, and and just as I was unloading them, I don't know, it was like, sometimes you get that feeling, you think I'm being watched, and this sort of shroud covers you, and you kind of sort of think, oh God, who's watching me? What's going on? Although I didn't feel like I was being watched, honestly, like I could just feel the air get really thick and heavy with sort of tension and animosity, and I was thinking kind of like, and I've sort of lifted my head slightly to look around and thinking, well, I can't see anything, but I hadn't turned around behind me, and I'm sort of there anyway. I'm sort of getting the groceries on, and I'm wondering what on earth's happening. The atmosphere changed like a pressure drop. The air turned thick, muggy almost. I looked up from the bars of the trolley, our food imprisoned for now, ready to be bagged and set free again. And there was Mara. So at this point, I've turned round. Her whole demeanour altered. Her eyes had narrowed into pinpricks, piercing, cold, fixed on something I hadn't seen yet. And I'm looking at this, what not like staring at her, because I think she would have slapped my face that day. But I'm looking at this woman, kind of thinking, oh my God, what have you seen? Like, what, huh? What's kind of going on? In my mind's eye, her tongue flicked across her lips like a predator about to feast. Because she had that look. She had that look of that intense kind of stare where, like a cheetah, sort of latches on to a deer or a wildebeest or whatever, and she's you know, I mean, she's really locked onto this, whatever she's looking at. So now, because of, I don't know what's going to happen, but my writer's instinct is telling me something's going to go down here. Clearly, two people in this supermarket have beef with each other, and I don't know why, but something's going to go down. So now I've flipped myself into James, the character, okay? So in my head, I asked, "What's up?" And I asked that casually. She didn't answer straight away, just that stare, charged with betrayal, history, loyalty twisted into resentment. So I'm looking, and now this is acting out in real life, and the dialogue is in my head. And this is what she actually said to the fella that she was with. Okay, so she's with this bloke, they're doing their weekly shop, and this is what she says to him. "Look at him," she said, and I mean the anger in her voice was wow. I mean it really was. I followed her eyes. So you've got her, then us, obviously the checkout that we're then backed onto, and on that checkout is this bloke and this other woman facing us, right? And I see this bloke here, and I kind of realised, and at first I thought something had happened in the supermarket. You know, I thought something had gone on in the supermarket where, you know, maybe they'd bumped into each other, or maybe something had happened, and you know that was kind of what was going on. You know, so I sort of, you know, at this point I didn't know. Um, And then, in a tone of someone rehearsing indifference, she muttered to the fellow that she was with, "Still hasn't paid my maintenance, you know." As if that was the headline, as if that was what really mattered. And at this point, I've said to the person that I'm with, "I'm really sorry. I need to go and sit over there. I need to start writing." And the person that I was with, she fully understands. She fully gets my writing. She's only a friend, you know, that sometimes I hang out with, and you know, what have you. You know, she's married, so you know, there's nothing going on, and she's just like, "Yeah, fine, you know, go and sit." And I've sort of sat down and I've started to write now. Um, but yeah, that was the one thing that she said to her fella that she was with. Still hasn't paid my maintenance, you know. And then I realised what the other guy was on the other till to her. It was her ex. And suddenly in my head I'm writing, you know, and on the page I'm writing all this down, you know. Suddenly, you know, Tracy, who what my character was originally called, you know, is now in front of her ex, and I'm thinking, this is gold. I can't believe my luck. You know, this is happening. It's happening right in front of me. You know, two made up people that I've created are now real life people, and I'm going to get to see their expressions. I'm going to get to see what their eyes say. I'm going to get to see what they do, how they interact with each other, whether they do say anything, whether there's confrontation, whatever. Like, I'm thinking, you know, this is going to play out in front of me. um, but I was watching her, not listening to her words, which she was still talking, and at this point I wasn't listening. You know, I'm writing down. Her body was performing anger, but her eyes betrayed her. Still locked onto him, still holding on. That wasn't hate. That was something else. Longing, maybe even guilt. And as I say, when I was looking at this girl or this woman, you know, and bearing in mind, you know, this woman's probably in, I would say, late 40s, early 50s. You know, if I was to hazard a guess, I mean, you know, it's not two kids we're talking about here. We're talking about, you know, two life experienced people. Um, but you could see, you know, it was as obvious as her red dress, or top or whatever she had on. You know, that she still loved him. You could see that from a mile away. You know, he didn't speak. He didn't need to. In that moment, everything was said. It told me who they were. The jealousy, the regret, the raw ache of something unfinished, not love the way it used to be, love that hurts because it's still there when it shouldn't be. And I've written that because, and I deliberately read that bit first, because after she's staring at him, he then looks up and he glanced He just sort of briefly looked at her for a second, and then he winked, as if to say, "I've got you, babe. I still love you. You know, I'm still here. Look at me." Um, and that was really uh, important to what I was writing down at the time. Mara hated him, yes, but more than that, she hated herself for still loving him, and she hated the world for letting her lose him when all she had left to blame was herself. That moment told me she belonged in the story. So did Dan. Not as background, not as noise. They were the heat, the tension, the thing that would set everything else in motion. That was when she earned her name, Mara. She's been with me ever since. Now, this is the point that I want to say about naming characters. Like I said before, if you name a Jillian, then suddenly she turns into a bitch, it doesn't really fit. Or if you name a, Abigail, which is quite a soft, sweet name, yes, you can make the names sinister, I guess, if you want to, but you know, I always sort of write a name down. Well, I have a file that's got loads of names on it and little subtext next to each name of what I picture when I read that name. But for this particular story, as I say, these two real people, and not really much thereafter happened. It kind of fizzled out. So the woman that he was with noticed, we'll say Mara, because I don't know what the woman's name was, noticed Mara, and as she walked up past Dan, she stopped, put one hand round the side of his face and onto his cheek, and then pushed her lips into the cheek on the other side of the face and held him, and then looked at the woman who was staring at him, and then smiled as if, yeah, you might want it. I get it, and that was and as I say, the woman that was with this bloke, who, I've sort of named Mara, she just stormed off. She left her bloke and she just went, and then like I say, it played out right in front of me. But obviously, I know in the story, my two characters are going to be not necessarily at loggerheads all the time. Yeah, they're going to sort of argue, but it's arguing for arguing's sake and fighting for fighting's sake. And eventually, towards the end of the book and the story, they have to come together because they have to work together to get out of the situation they're in. So yes, there's this kind of anger and everything else, but deep down there is still this teammanship between them. They're still one. They still fight for the same cause. Because at the end of the day, they don't want their secret coming out. Dan especially, because Dan's a detective, so he can't have what he and Mara have done coming out. Because it would ruin his career. I mean, it would absolutely shatter his career. And so I then went home that day straight into the house and started writing scenes between these two. And the thing that came up, and as I say, originally her name was Tracy, and I think his name was Reginald. I think I might be mixing him up with another character, but I'm sure his name was Reginald. And I'm, writing or typing away, and it was becoming so clunky having to keep writing out Tracy and Reginald, in the bits where you needed to sort of kind of highlight who's saying what. And so in the end, I came to the name of Mara and Dan for one very good, simple reason. And if you are to take anything from today, consider this yourselves. When you're writing tension and fights and arguments, you don't want to be stopping the flow trying to remember how to write or spell long names. Keep them short, keep them punchy. The shorter and the punchier they are, the more impact they'll have, not only on your story, but also on your reader, because your reader doesn't want to keep reading long, clunky names when there's an action bit in the book, they don't want to do it. Now, sometimes it may work, and I'm not saying that it doesn't. Sometimes it may, but for me, it didn't. For me, in this instance, it was important that these two characters just basically had short names. So that was how we came up with Mara and Dan. Luckily enough, as I say, this thing played out, and I had two characters for the price of one, and I was really really lucky. And as I say, it was just right place, right time, and I was able to get everything down that I wanted from two characters for the book. Next week, we're not going to introduce all of the characters and show you how I came up with them, just because the process is pretty much the same for all of them. It's just different names and maybe a different situation, but the process that I go through is still the same for all of them. And like I say, you don't need to sort of know every single one. You can kind of go from there. But next week we are going to meet another character, and she's the second lead female in the book, but she's not real. She was real. She was real once. That's not easy to say, even at 9:15 in the morning. She was real once. She was alive once, but now she's dead, and now she lives in James's head, and she's trying to piece together how and why she was killed, and that's when the story all begins to tie back into one, and actually what we think are just life starts to turn into, well, that's a bit of a heavy coincidence, and yet that their lives are intertwined way more than what they ever thought that they would. And yeah, but it's important that I go through Kay's character with you, um, because you need to understand if you're writing about someone that isn't real, that's a voice in the head, because the way that you write has to change with that, because you need people to know that she's not real, but to put her in the story where the characters Dan and Mara can't interact with her. They really can't interact with her because she lives inside James's head, and the world as such can't react with her. But through James, she can kind of dictate what happens in the world. And as I say, it's a bit of a different way of writing. And I've done a couple of stories, where the characters are not real; they live inside someone, and they influence what that person does, and they influence what goes on around them. And some for the good, some for the bad, because we're human at the end of the day. And yeah, so as I say, next week will be Kay, and again, just a quick brief, sort of kind of explanation how I arrived at her, and all of that. But thanks ever so much for watching. Thanks ever so much, even more so, for listening. I hope my words were audible, even with a real stuffy nose and a sore throat. We've managed to get our way through it. If you've enjoyed this video, why not smash the thumbs up? If you enjoy the content, why not hit that subscribe button? It's free to do. I'm a small channel. It really helps me to push my work out. And like I say, when we get the story finally written, which we're not that far away now from starting, I will say that we're not that far now from starting. And basically, the way we're probably going to do it is that I'm going to write it, and then I'm going to edit it, i.e. correct the spelling and the grammar, and then I'm going to put it on screen, and then like today I'm just going to read it out, and then at the end of the videos, obviously in the comments and what have you, you can put your thoughts in the comment, what you like, what you didn't like, what you think I might be able to change, what might work better. And then what I'll do is I'll collect all of them up, and then when we come to do the rewrite, which we will have to do, I can then start to go through that section, and start go through the comments and the suggestions, and maybe start to implement some if I think, well, yeah, actually that would work a lot better, or yeah, that's actually quite a nice detail that they've added there, or whatever. So yeah, thanks ever so much for listening, and I'll see you again next time. Bye for now.